It's another episode on Troubles Restoration, and today we're hopefully going to be taking out the windscreen in one piece and also removing some other bits and bobs. Let's get to it. Right, today what I'm going to be doing is taking the windscreen out and then starting to remove the dials in the dash and trying to kind of remove some of the wiring under there. So we've got the speedo, the rev-ometer, tachometer, we've got, what else have we got? There's only 3 dials. What are they? Speedo, tachometer, oil temperature, pressure gauge. Hopefully spaghetti junction isn't too confusing under there, but I get my hands on a wiring diagram anyway, so it's not the end of the world if I can't remember how it goes. But yes, right, first step windscreen, second step dash and dials. Let's go. Before starting on the windscreen, I decided to take the windscreen wipers off first. These had to come off anyway, and they were just going to get in the way with trying to get the windscreen out. So I started by undoing this nut. It was a clamping nut that held the windscreen arm onto the windscreen spindle. Even though it looked pretty rusty, it came undone quite easily. Getting the windscreen wiper off the spindle was a different story. I couldn't seem to be able to get it off. But then my dad comes along, he touches the thing, and it just falls off. Classic. Underneath the wiper arm were these rubber grommets. One of them just came off, but underneath that one there was another, which I presume created a seal between the motor spindle and the scuttle on Trouble. This one, like the rest of Trouble's rubbers, had become really hard, and it didn't want to come off, so I decided to lube it with some WD-40. But this can was getting quite low and it didn't really want to work unless it was held upright. But Trouble's wing was getting in the way, which meant I had to try and take some long shots.
When you're low on pressure.
With at least some of the WD-40 hitting the target, I decided just to leave it and let it soak to work its magic and then go work on the other side. I think getting those rubbers off is going to be a problem for another day. Can I get this one off? How did you do it?
It just fell off from my hand.
Yeah, but what were you doing to...
It's on tape up, it's blind.
It's blind.
Yeah, but it's just a taper, isn't it? We just stand here and try.
Go on. See, get your best shot. You have to stand closer, otherwise the camera won't get it. Yeah.
I'm going to get you another tin.
Right. With the window wipers off, I could now start on the windscreen. I've actually never taken a windscreen out of a car. Yes, I did take the rear window out, but I actually ended up cutting that out by cutting the rubber, and I didn't want to do that on the front screen. I wanted to see if I could take the window out properly. So to do that, what I had to do is remove this piece of trim. It's actually in 2 pieces with little kind of sliding covering plates that cover the joints in the middle at the top and the bottom of the windscreen. Although this piece of trim looks shiny and is decorative, it actually also serves another purpose. It adds extra protection from rain, so it sits in this little groove in the window sill, and it then pushes the sill against the windscreen hole on the car and also against the edge of the windscreen, creating a better seal for rain or whatever else is thrown at the car. The trim is only a thin aluminium extrusion, so it could buckle or bend if I tried to pull it out too aggressively, so I had to be pretty careful. So I just slowly made my way around the windscreen, releasing it bit by bit. With the driver's side piece of trim out, I then started on the other side, but this actually wasn't as easy. I couldn't get it out with just my fingers, so instead what I did is I got a screwdriver and a little piece of wood to put against the car, and then levered the screwdriver against the wood to lever the piece of trim out. This did work, but it just wasn't quite as quick as using my fingers. Now, from my understanding of how windscreens work with their seals and that bit of trim, I should have now been able to just push the windscreen out. But my windscreen, Travel's windscreen, had other plans. Travel definitely didn't need that extra bit of trim to help seal her windscreen. This thing wasn't going anywhere. Yes, so the rubber had actually decided to identify as plastic and not rubber. There was no way the windscreen was going to budge, so I got the Stanley knife out. I know I didn't want to have to cut it out, but I couldn't see any other way of getting the windscreen out. Once I'd cut the rubber off, I still couldn't get the windscreen out. So I went to go get my dad. He has experience taking windscreens out, some in one piece, others in a few pieces. Let's hope he can get Travel's windscreen out in one. It turns out I hadn't actually cut enough of the rubber off at the top, but after more cutting and some persuasive slaps from the inside, it did finally come free from the window aperture. And, critically, in one piece.
It's the most expensive sound I've ever heard.
I'm not sure where all this rust came from, but it turns out that the bottom of the windscreen aperture isn't in great condition. As hard as it was to remove the windscreen, my window rubber and the trim actually hadn't been doing a very good job. At some stage, there'd been a fair amount of water in here. I'm not an expert, but I'm almost certain hoovering up my rusted out windowsill lip thing isn't good news. And one thing I am certain on is that this is probably going to be really expensive to put right. Okay, so we've got the windscreen out, all in one piece. What are your first thoughts on her scuttle?
It's the same. First thoughts are the same as my very, very first thoughts about a scuttle. It's scuttleless.
The windscreen.
I think the demisting, these extra demisting holes are coming very handy.
Yeah. So we no longer have a lip for the window rubber to lip onto. It is now flush.
But
That's another day's problem.
it is what it is. So, okay.
Window is out, so now we're on to the dash. Switches, dials, CD player. Before we start that, and before I poke my eye out with this,
I think you should take it off.
I'm going to take this off. Before I started on the dash, I decided to quickly take off the aerial. Like lots of jobs on this car, I thought it was going to be quick. I mean, how awkwardly can an aerial actually be fixed to a car? Well, it turns out quite, especially when you're unable to collapse it because it's corroded. To quickly take it off, I thought all I had to do was undo the clamping nut on top of the wing, but this didn't want to undo very easily. In the end, I held a spanner on some flats on the aerial itself to stop it spinning, and then my dad undid the clamping nut. This nut was pretty tight on its threads. I thought this little rubber seal over the top might have been causing some resistance, so I decided to take it off, but it actually didn't make much difference. After some persuasion and a lot of WD-40, we eventually got the nut undone and then attempted to collapse the aerial to remove it. I discovered two things. One, the aerial was never going to collapse as it was so corroded, and it turned out that it still had an army of fixings holding the bottom of the antenna to the car itself inside the jaw jamb, which were a very bizarre size.
I have to say I've never seen an aerial mounted so securely as this before.
That's not 10mm. It's going to be 8, right?
Must be, yeah.
There's no way that's fitting. So 9.
No, never.
Yeah, it's 9mm.
Oh, it's the first.
Have you ever come across? Wait. I'm not. Look at that. That is a true 9mm.
Amazing. Well, now it feels like an aerial on a British 60s car. It's not moving anywhere. I think it's the cable's getting in the way now.
I've got another screw.
There's another bracket.
Yeah.
You serious?
No. One of these fixings was a clamping bolt that clamped the bracket around the antenna, and the other fixing held the bracket to the car. In theory, not too big a deal to remove. But because the bracket was inside the door jamb and we still had the doors on, it was pretty awkward to get to.
What do you mean another one?
The screw that holds the bracket to the car. There you go, now feel it, now it'll feel really
So
like
there's not
it.
one screw does in both jobs?
No. No. There we go.
Oh yeah. There is a bit of a problem.
The aerial. Even more awkward was undoing the aerial wire. This was the last thing between me and getting the aerial free, but I couldn't undo it with my fingers, so I used some pliers on it instead. It took so many bites, it wasn't quick. How many bites do we think we're going to need to do to get one turn? Now we're talking.
Now you're talking. Is that Torquing?
Once I'd painfully undone the aerial, we then could lower it down and thread it through the rusty sill. It was just as well my sill had loads of holes in it, as not being able to collapse the aerial meant we needed to thread it through a lot further down the car than originally designed. Luckily, the aerial was also thin and quite bendy. It was never particularly straight anyway. But it's serviceable. It's better than us chopping it off, right? That's a wrap on day 5. I know I said that I was hoping to also get the dash stripped in the second intro of the video, but the aerial took it out of me and I couldn't face playing with any more wires. So yeah, we called it a day there. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of Troubles Restoration. If you did, please give it a like, and if you'd like to follow the rest of Troubles' journey, please subscribe. Thanks guys, see you next week.